Hi everyone, welcome to this week's art history lesson. Today we're going to be learning about a really broad topic called land art. So let's go ahead and dive on in. Land art, which is also called earth art sometimes, and then we're just going to have a dive into what that really means, because you just say land art, you're like, don't know. So the most famous piece of land art is this piece, Spiral Jetty, by Robert Smithson. So that's it pictured here. That was also out there. That's kind of a close-up version of it, but here it is from further away. And this is a sculpture made in the Salt Lake in Utah. And he made it in 1970. And he made it using rock, earth and algae so as to form a 1,500-foot spiral-shaped jetty protruding into the lake. And it was kind of made so it would be this sculpture that would deteriorate over time and kind of disappear and reappear and change as the water levels in the lake change. So it's kind of a big sculpture in the middle of nowhere that's not meant to be permanent. Okay, so that kind of embodies some of the key aspects of land art. I'm just going to explain now, but this is kind of the seminal work, really. When people talk about land art, this is the one that they generally cite first. So I followed suit. So what is land art formally? We're going to go for it formally because there's actually quite a large spectrum of stuff that is considered land art. It's quite a big thing. So generally it's something that uses natural materials, earth, sand, plants, stuff that you can find in nature, rock, kind of the landscape in general. And kind of the idea behind that is these materials are available to everyone. So kind of in theory, not always in reality, anyone can kind of go and find some dirt and make something, or everyone can go and get some grass and make something. So it's kind of meant to be democratized in that way. And it's not traditionally valuable, so it's not like a lump of bronze or marble or gold or something that we kind of value already. The only value in the dirt or the rock or the plants is the fact that you have made it into this piece of art. That makes sense. So kind of modern land art started in the 60s and 70s in America, and it was kind of part of the whole kind of counterculture thinking time. And it was kind of a response to commercialization of public spaces in America and the general materialism of the art world. Because if you think about it, you've got all these kind of you've got these artists coming up, they're thinking they're wanting to change the world, and they get into the art market and they're like, actually just some rich oil billionaire is buying my work and he's just using it to kind of hide his money. So people kind of became disenfranchised from the art establishment, and they wanted to make something that wasn't easily commodifiable. So it's not something that you could buy and flip and kind of use just to transport money around, as kind of art is often used. It was also a way of kind of connecting with nature and the land. So at a time when kind of everyone's living in the city and there's a kind of a big back to the land movement, you've got kind of all these hippies going and living on ranches and communes. It was a kind of a way of connecting back to the earth. So you kind of get, there's a whole range of land art which we're going to go through in a wee minute, but some of it is permanent, so it kind of becomes a big permanent sculpture, maybe somewhere out, often in the desert, maybe in the woods, somewhere quite inaccessible, and some are temporary, and the temporary ones kind of, they need to be documented, maybe in like photography or film, to bring back and show in the gallery. So a lot of land art kind of needs a lot of recording and a lot of documentation so people can know where it is, because especially if it's away out in the desert, not a lot of people can get to it. Or alternatively, artists bring in natural materials into the gallery and make work in the gallery space using these materials. So that's kind of the basics of land art. What you'll see is a lot of the examples we're going to show kind of contradict that, because art is art, and there's always lots of money involved, and especially if you're wanting to move around lots of earth in the desert, you kind of need lots of money to do that. You kind of need patrons You kind of need someone to pay you to be able to do that. So kind of there's a lot of contradiction. So I don't think any of our pieces kind of stand up to all of these ideals, you know. So this is a quote from Barbara Ross, who was an art critic at the time, and she says of land art, "A dissatisfaction with the current social and political system results in an unwillingness to produce commodities which gratify and perpetuate that system, where the sphere of ethics and aesthetics merge." So that's kind of giving a bit more context to why a lot of artists didn't want to make something that rich people could just buy and have. They wanted to make something that was kind of, I don't want to use this word, but like purer than that. They wanted to make something that was kind of just art, that couldn't be kind of corrupted by an oil giant or a big drug conglomerate buying it. And that's because there's kind of this, art often operates within the white space, it's isolated, but outside the whole world was changing. You had civil rights movement, you had the women's liberation movement, you had a lot of anti-Vietnam War protests, and also kind of the beginning of the climate movement. So a lot of artists were kind of engaging with these topics, and it didn't feel right to be making stuff for rich people to look at in a white space. They wanted to kind of go out and create something that didn't need the validation of an institution to be called art. They were wanting to make something that was kind of art for itself. So that's kind of a bit of background on it. So now I'm going to take you through a few examples. So we're going to look at some kind of really early examples of land art, I would say, because it's not true that land art started in the 60s and 70s. People have been making art out in the landscape and out of earth for a very long time. So this is a piece that is said to have inspired the first piece we looked at, the Spiral Jetty, and this is the Giant Serpent Mound in Ohio, and it is 419 metres long and about a metre high at its tallest points. And it's thought to have been made in 1070 AD, so a really long time ago. And it's each of these curves of the serpent line up with where the moon rises at different points in the year. So it's a bit kind of like Stonehenge in that way, that it's set up in a certain way that it aligns with the cosmos. And these big pieces kind of are all over the world. So this is an example of one from Dorset. So this is quite young. It's from the 17th century. It was made by digging back the turf to reveal chalk beneath, because there's chalk. I like the White Cliffs of Dover. There's a lot of chalk in that area. And others bring in chalk or use white stones to mark them out. So this is a hill figure, which is a kind of a British geoglyph. And geoglyphs are these big pieces that are carved into the land. And lots of them are really, really old. And they're kind of found all over the world. So I'm going to show you a few more of these as well, because I just think they're really cool. So this is the Huffington White Horse. And this is another really old one. This is from the late Bronze Age. So you can imagine these kind of hunter-gatherer folk that maybe started to keep animals a little bit, and they've decided to gouge this beautiful horse out of the turf. And I really like it. I think it's a really beautiful shape. It's quite abstract, which I really like, but it's really, really old. We've also got the long Man of Wilmington. So again, he's quite young. He's from the 16th century, but he's another guy that's been carved into the chalk. He's recently been restored, actually, and they brought in white stones from the outside to mark him in. I think these are really cool. There's one in Scotland. No, there's two in Scotland, up near Aberdeenshire, which are a stag and a horse. They're not quite as fun, so I haven't put them in. This is the Atacama Giant, who's in Chile, and he is the largest prehistoric geoglyph, and he was made between 1000 AD and 1400 AD, so really, really, really old again, and he is 119 metres tall. And he was an example of an early astronomical calendar, and each section of his head marks where the moon would set at different points in the year, and marks different times when the rains would come to the desert. So it's really important. It would have been a really important tool for people knowing when to plant and harvest out in the kind of harsh areas of the desert. And there's, in the area where this guy is, There's 5,000 geoglyphs have been found because obviously the desert preserves them quite well. So it's really cool that they're all still about, and we can kind of see older cultures using art also as a tool for farming and recording what's happening around them. And some of the oldest ones are the Nazca Lines in Peru from 500 BCE. And there's 70 designs of animals that are between 40 meters and 110 meters across, and also some really, really long, perfectly straight lines. And these are all made by kind of just digging 15 centimeter trenches and then filling them with a lighter clay. And the purpose of these isn't really known, but they would have definitely taken a lot of work. And I just think it's amazing that they managed to, I don't know how they got up so high to see exactly what they looked like. I just think they're really cool. So that's a kind of a layout of them there. And then here's one of the birds. Also a big old spider. There he is. That's just made by digging out a line. I kind of think of these as like giant art attacks. For anybody that watched Art Attack, when they'd make all like a tiger out of t-shirts or something. And here is a monkey with a really cool tail. And then here's a kind of a more modern one, and this is in Australia. So this is the Bunjill, and it was actually made for the 2006 Commonwealth Games, and it's in the Yuyang Park in Victoria, Australia, and it's kind of references the mythology of the Wathaurong people who are native to that area, and Bunjill is the supreme god who still lives in the sky, who made the humans, animals and the plants and taught mankind how to behave on Earth. There you go. So that's a really big mythical bird made out of rocks. So looks pretty cool. So there's still kind of people following on this tradition today of making these big geoglyphs, which is a really cool word as well, geoglyph. So that was kind of more ancient examples of land art, which I think are quite good to think of, because obviously the people that are still making it today and were making it in the 60s and 70s were well aware of these. And I think although we don't really have big geoglyphs in Scotland, we've got lots of standing stones and stuff. So if you think of like Callanish up on Harris, and a few more of the kind of the big standing stones in the islands and further up north, there's kind of a big tradition of it. So today we're going to look at 4 kinds of land art. These aren't official categories. These are categories that I've divided them up into. And I would say we're going to start with my least favourite and work towards my most favourite. So I've got a heavy dose of opinions in here, so feel free to not agree with me, that's okay. So the first one we're going to look at is changing or gouging. And this is kind of like the big examples of land art, and also the ones that I feel kind of split from some of the initial values of the medium, just because if you're going to cut a big hole in the desert, 1, you need to buy the desert, 2, you need to pay all the people to dig it all out, 3, you are destroying a bit of the landscape. So I don't feel it's very ecological or particularly countercultural, because you have to get lots of money to do it. So the first we're going to look at is Double Negative by Michael Heiser. So Michael Heiser used to be an investment banker, which I think says a lot about him. So that's probably where he's got his money to do this. And he went out into the desert and he cut these 2 big holes. So he's made kind of a trench here and a trench here. And when you stand in one trench, you can look into the other trench. So it's kind of like a big environmental sculpture. Personally, I don't like it, which you may have picked up on, but it is kind of one of the big seminal works. And Michael Heiser is a big name in land art. And it is pretty impressive. It's really cool to kind of, once you're in these spaces, because that's the other thing as well, like we can only access this through photographs, but if you were to be able to go and experience it, to stand in a big gouge like that would be pretty amazing, and able to look across and see your pal on the other one and be able like, whoa, this is man-made. But again, yeah, so you can only really go if you're very rich, I suppose. Another issue I have with it. So he describes this piece, Double Negative, is really a scar of a kind, an intrusion of nature, an assault of some sorts. It's as though a surgeon took an exploratory cut of a mesa to show its innards. So the mesa is kind of this name for this section of desert. Yeah, so I don't like his intentions there. I think that's quite mean intentions, really. But you know, you don't have to like all art. It's also fine if you like this. Please don't, feel free to disagree with me. I have many strong opinions that I then regret later. Yeah, so that's a piece I think it's important to look at. So that's kind of one of the ones in the tradition of looking at the landscape and using man-made tools to change it and alter it in some way, so that you really think about what's going on around you, essentially. This is another one of his pieces, and this was one of 9. So this one is called Isolated Mass or Circumflex, number 9 of the 9 Nevada depressions. So he made this in 1968, and this is a kind of squiggle cut into the desert. So I suppose it's chiming in with that tradition of the geoglyphs. So he's carving into the land and making shapes, making pictures. Right, so that's that. So I'm not gonna focus too much on the gouging because personally I'm not a fan. So I'm gonna look more at number 2, which is focusing. So I wonder, what do you think we're looking at here? What have we got? If you're like, oh, just come upon this image, I'm not here. What do you think it is? So here is what it is. So at first glance you'll be like, right, what's that? So it is some concrete tubes, some really big concrete tubes that you can stand in, and they're all pointing in different ways, and they've all got holes in the side as well. So this is a piece called Sun Tunnels that was up from 1973 to 1976, and it's by Nancy Holt, who's another land artist, and it stretches across 40 acres in the Great Basin Desert in Utah. So you'll notice a lot of these are in the desert because especially back in the 70s, there weren't many restrictions on what you could do in the desert. So you could just go and plank down some big concrete tubes and nobody would really say anything. And now they've got a few more environmental laws. So this was a sculpture, but also Nancy really meticulously filmed this piece and took many, many photographs, such as these, kind of documenting how it is throughout the day, so we can get a lot more of a sense of what it would like to be there, even though it's not still there. Or is it still there? Maybe I'm going to look that up. Maybe it is still there. Research I should have done before I started recording this video. Anyway, but she placed these big 4 tubes so as to frame the sun on the horizon at the summer and winter solstice, creating a kind of lens that engulfs the body. Small holes in the tubes, modelled on the position of 4 constellations, throw scattered discs of light onto the viewer nestled inside. There we go. So she's kind of created almost like a big, so I kind of think of it as like, you know, when you go to the seaside and you've got those telescopes you can look through and it points to like something nice to look at, and you put 50p in and you can look at it for a bit. I kind of think of it like a big fine art example of that. She's isolated some really beautiful views in the desert, so when you stand in these tubes you've got to look at this one section, and it also kind of chimes in with that idea of these older monuments such as Stonehenge, such as the Serpent Mound, that it aligns with these kind of solar and lunar events, and it's very much kind of in tune with the universe, that summer and winter solstice. Because that's, I think, if you don't know, Stonehenge also does that. Stonehenge lines up with the summer and winter solstice. It's a big old human tradition of the kind of stuff we like to do. So here's a lovely picture demonstrating how the light changes within the tunnel during the day. I think that's really nice. So here's an example of a guy sitting in the tube, being in the tube, and looking through at the different views. So he's kind of looking through a double tube. And I think it must be quite serene. I imagine kind of sitting there, really thinking about what you're looking at. And I think kind of one of her ideas behind this was when you're in this sort of kind of desert landscape, it's so vast, there's so much around you. So she's kind of focusing it down for you so you can really kind of be in and not get overwhelmed and just kind of like, wow, look at this bit, this is absolutely stunning. So it's kind of got an appreciation for the landscape in it, which I think is missing from the last kind of land art we were looking at, the changing and the gouging. The focusing really highlights the beauty of the environment around you and kind of makes you stop and pause and really take in and connect with the landscape, if that makes sense. Like this guy's doing, he looks like he's having a lovely time. Here's a view of one at, I think this is the winter solstice. Looking like, so you've got this lovely sunset kind of framed through these tubes. Then here's another one at a different time of day. Really, really nice. I just think they're beautiful. They're really nice. They're very simple, but I think they have a lovely effect in that it does make you change how you look at the landscape. It's different from it normally would be. Like you could just have a picture of the desert, but I don't think it would be as nice. Again, that's just my opinion. Yeah, and then here's one during the day, and here's one at sunset. It's just lovely. Really nice. I imagine it's a really calm place to be. So the second piece we're going to look at is actually, you can go and visit this. This is in Yorkshire. It's not in the Utah or the Nevada desert. This is one that is open for you to go and see. And this is an unusual piece of land art because generally land art doesn't exist in sculpture parks because sculpture parks are still part of the gallery. So they're still kind of attached to the validation of the institution. So I'd say this is kind of the fringe of land art. Yep, so this is in Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So here it is, it's in this old deer shelter. So he's this James Turrell, who's a sculptor of light. It's a very fancy title. I think he gave that to himself. Yep, he did up this old deer shelter. When you go into this deer shelter, you come into this space. So it's very white, it's very concrete, it's got these lovely smooth benches all around it. You maybe sit down on the bench, have a wee pause, you look up, and there's this lovely skylight. There's a perfect kind of skylight cut into the roof. When you look at it, you're looking at the sky almost like you're looking at a picture. So he's kind of abstracted the sky and kind of put it in a format that we can kind of recognise as art. We've got it in this lovely kind of rectangle, and it just makes you focus on kind of what that section of sky is doing. So he uses light and space to create art installations which extend and enhance perception. From indoor pieces which baffle the senses, creating illusions of infinite diffused light to outdoor sky spaces. So this is one of the outdoor sky spaces. So you can sit in it and just really watch the sky. And it's kind of focusing you in on that one section. So you're not getting overwhelmed by it all. You can kind of focus in and appreciate one bit. So Turrell is perhaps known for his ambitious Rodden crater, which is again a piece of the big Gougy land art. But this is where he created a crater and adapted it. Again in the desert, they love the desert, of an entire extinct volcano, and he made a series of these installations in it. I don't think it's finished yet, and you can't visit, and he kept it secret for many, many years. Lots of people always get chucked out for trying to trespass. So that's why we're not looking at that example, because we definitely can't go. But this one we can go to. Yeah, so he's also done a series of these across the world. So some of them are set up for the sun, some of them are for the moon and the stars. But the deer space in Yorkshire is set up to appreciate the sky. There's some really nice pictures of clouds. Yeah, I think if you can go to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, I think it's probably, I had a look on the website. It isn't open yet. It will be open at some point. But apparently it's a really nice place. It's one of those things that's been on my list to visit for a long time and I've never been. So the third kind we're going to look at is growing. So that is when people are growing stuff as art, which might be like, what? But we'll get into it, don't worry. So this is a close-up of a picture from a piece called Wheat field, a confrontation. Ooh, that's an arty title, isn't it? Very arty. So what do we mean by wheat field, a confrontation? Well, let's see. So this was a piece by Agnes Dean that she did in 1982, and she planted a 2-acre wheat field on a landfill, which is, so it was a piece of, it was a landfill, but then it was actually up for sale, which is where she got it. And she chose to plant a 2-acre field of wheat 2 blocks from Wall Street, so 2 streets away from Wall Street, and the World Trade Center, because it was the 80s. And it also faced the Statue of Liberty. So you'll be like, all right, okay, so you planted a wheat field in the middle of town. What are you saying? What does that mean? Also, nice picture. She looks really cool. So here's a kind of a step-by-step of what happened. So there you go. You got the rubble, got the first round, beautiful wheat field. There it is. It's aging, it's growing, and they've got it all the way through till harvest. So 200 truckloads of dirt was brought in, and 285 furrows were dug by hand and cleared of all the rock and rubbish and debris that was there. And seeds were sown by hand, and the furrows were covered with soil. So it was quite a big labour-intensive thing. She had a lot of people helping her out. Lots of kids participated. They got schools in to help. The field was maintained for 4 months, cleared of wheat, weeded, fertilised and sprayed against mildew fungus, because it wasn't a very clean site, and an irrigation system was set up. The crop was harvested on August 16th and yielded over 1,000 pounds of healthy golden wheat. Which again, you might be thinking, whoop-de-doo, what's the art about? So part of the art is in the documentation, but part of this is kind of a performance piece, I would say. So it's an environmental piece because the field was there. But she took photographs to document it. But mostly I would say this is a kind of a performance sculpture, which is where contemporary art gets a bit muddy. So here's a picture of them harvesting the wheat. So the piece aimed to question how we use land, what is valuable and what is prioritised in the way we construct our lives. And I suppose the main bit of that challenge comes from is that the monetary value of that plot of land was lucratively high because of its location. So it's right next to World Trade Center. It's really neat. It's in central New York. It's very landlocked. It's right next to Wall Street, you know, the centre of kind of, well, not centre of global commerce, but a big hub of global commerce, which was also getting a lot of stick at the time. So this piece of land was worth £4.5 billion, and she used it to plant some food and to do some farming in the middle of the city. So she chose wheat because it was quite a universal symbol. It's food, it's energy, it's stuff we trade, it's got an inherent value to it because we need it. And I suppose the idea is kind of how does this value, the value of this food compare to the value of all the financial trading that's going on next door? Like if you really isolate it down, which has more value when you look at it? And it was part of an exhibition that was about world hunger at the time as well. So it referred to kind of the mismanagement of our resources, mismanagement of waste, world hunger, ecological concerns, and it was trying to draw attention to our misplaced priorities. So she definitely had an angle. Let's just say, like she doesn't like Wall Street. She likes farming. She's a climate lady, which I can get behind. That's cool. Yeah, so it's kind of a bit of art about trying to make a point. So this is kind of one of these things that you might be kind of sitting thinking, is it art? I would argue yes, it is art because she took lots of nice pictures and it was kind of done within an art context. But also feel free to hate it. That's absolutely chill, no worries. And then this piece we're going to look at this. So this is Ash Dome by David Nash, and this is at a secret location somewhere in Snowdonia in North Wales. So that's very confusing. So have a look at it. Have a look at this picture. So this is a picture of when it started. And what do you think it might be? Have a wee moment to have a wee guess. What's he doing? What's he up to? The sneaky David Nash at his secret location. So this was taken in 1997, and now the plan is it's going to look like this. So he's planted trees. He's then started to shape them in 1983. And the idea is to shape them so that they form a roof. So he's kind of manipulating the way the trees grow to create a dome. Cool. So in 1995, he was at this point, doing these pictures along the way. And this is what it looks like now. So this is where he's been growing his trees and kind of training them to create this kind of an indoor space outdoors out of trees, which is really pretty cool. There's also a guy that's been trying to do this near Glasgow as well. He's done quite a lot of them, whereas David Nash kind of did one as a sculpture. This guy's trying to make like a house. Good luck to him, it does rain a lot. There we go. So this is a piece of it today. So he's kind of, his idea was to kind of create a space for the future. So he says, when I planted the ring of trees for Ash Dome, the Cold War was still a threat. There was serious economic gloom, very high unemployment in our country, and nuclear war was a real possibility. So, you know, not a nice time. And we were killing the planet, which we still are because of greed. In Britain, our governments were changing quickly, so we had very short-term political and economic policies. To make a gesture by planting something for the 21st century, which was what Ash Dome was about, was a long-term commitment, an act of faith. I didn't know what I was letting myself in for. So on the surface, the guy, he's planted some trees in a circle, and he's training them to try and make a room, which will be quite a nice place to be on the outside. But kind of if you kind of distill that down, he was kind of living that what is it, the wise man plants trees under which shade he'll never rest, or something. There's a saying like that. You know the one I mean. So you need to plant trees under which you know you will not sit. It was kind of like carrying forward, taking care of the future. So although he was kind of feeling he was living in lots of uncertain times and like considering all these negative things were happening in the world, he was trying to create a space and kind of take an action that he felt was for the future and to create something for the future. Yeah, I really like it. I think it's really nice. I've attached some videos of the piece because it's quite hard to capture in photographic form again. But there's some really nice videos of being in the dome, and it looks great. I would love to be in the dome. I think it looks really soothing. You can imagine just standing there surrounded by beautiful leaves, maybe the wind's blowing through them a bit. You can kind of just hear the of the wind in the trees. And because it's a secret location, no one else is there, you know, it's just there, it's just calm, it's serene. So unfortunately, because the trees are ashes, there's a big issue at the moment with ash dieback, which is a disease that's kind of sweeping across British ash trees. So unfortunately the ash dome has been infected, so it will never be finished, and it will never grow to its full potential, which is really sad. What Nash has said about that is people have told me all sorts of remedies for ash dieback, but the whole thing would become too precious. So he feels it would kind of interfere with, you know, the process. It's a work depending on natural forces. So ash dieback is a natural force. I have to accept that as part of the original concept. So I mean, that makes sense. Like, you're trying to create something with nature, and if nature says no, like you kind of got to listen to it. Ah, so that's really nice. And there's it in winter as well, so you can kind of see a shape of the trees a bit more. I think it feels really druidy. I really like it. I think it's really nice. And now we're on to my favourite. So this is number 4. This is land art that is temporary or ephemeral, which is our big word for a Wednesday. Ephemeral. So ephemeral. Anyway, ephemeral. It essentially fancy word for temporary. It's not going to be there all the time. It's there and then it'll go. It's not tangible. You can't touch it. So the first kind of ephemeral work we're going to look at is A Line Made by Walking, which was made by Richard Long in 1967. So he made this when he was a student, when he was 22, and it's kind of about, can the act of walking be an art form? which some of you might be thinking, no, I'm going to make the argument, yes. So kind of this piece, it sparked a lot of questions. Was it a performance piece? Is it photography? Is it a temporary sculpture? And especially in 1967, it challenged traditional ideas of what sculpture could be. And it's an example of a minimalist and conceptual sculpture. So it's minimalist because it's not fussy, there's not much going on, it's the very bare minimum that you need to create a sculpture. It's not going over the top. And it's conceptual because it's about the idea of the walking. Without the idea of the walking, it has no purpose really. You're like, it's just some tramp down glass. Kind of the concept of the art as the walk is what makes it art. And it's also an early example of land art. So this line was made by walking. So he just walked up and down until there was evidence that he had been doing that, and then he photographed it rather beautifully. There you go. So that's that. So he's gone on to make a series more. Some of these lines are made by walking, and some of them are made by slight alterations he's made to the landscape. So for example, on the left here, we have a line in the Himalayas from 1983, and that's where he was going to be walking along the line, but also he's moved rocks in to mark where he's going to be walking. Walking a line in Peru in 1972, that was on the right. Yep, so that's another line made by walking. He walked up and down, up and down, up and up, down, up and down, up and down, up and up and up and down, until again he'd made this line here. So again, another temporary sculpture. So he is affecting the land, but he's not like gouging it out, so it will eventually disappear. And then this is actually my favourite one. This is a line he's made here, and he's marked it in a darker material, and it's two rivers water line. So it's kind of marking the point where the waters of the two rivers blend. So it's kind of, what he's doing is kind of highlighting either the activity that's happening in the landscape. So either it's the walking, it's what the human has been doing, or it's where two elements are merging. I really like that one. They're really lovely. Also, the photos are quite classy, what do you think? So now we're on to Hamish Filton, who is another walking artist. I would say he is the walking artist's walking artist. I watched an interview with him, and I just think he's been doing it a very long time, so it's very hard to understand what he's saying because he's so into it. You know, it's kind of like an academic that's been like learning about some really niche area of history, and it's kind of hard to talk to them because you don't have the kind of, you've not been living it and breathing it as much as they have. So Hamish Filton has been making works based on the experience of walks since 1972. That's all he's been doing. And he's a bit different in that he doesn't just take photos. He takes photographs, makes sketches, and makes text pieces based on the experience of each walk he does. So here we go. We've got, this is 7 days walking Cairngorm, Scotland. So he's done the walk. 2, he's taken the photograph, and then he's kind of written these text pieces about it that are quite poetic. So we've got 7 days walking and 7 nights camping in Wood, March 1985. Solstice, so he's kind of done seven 7-day walks. So he's done 7 days walks. So he's done solstice, full moon, and 7-day circular walk. Walking for 7 days in a wood, February, full moon. So you kind of get the gist. He's listing 7 days of 7 walks he's done. And I actually think the image is beautiful. So kind of, obviously for him the artwork is the walk, but I think this is also a really nice object. So during visits to South Dakota and Montana in the 1960s, Filton decided that art should be about life, not about producing objects. So again, this is kind of a movement towards performance and a movement away from art that can be commodified, a movement away from art that can be bought for lots of money by rich people and kind of used as status symbols. So it's kind of moving away from an art that he kind of sees as an art that can be corrupted. So he's very interested in Native American culture and Buddhist meditation practices. Filton has walked in more than 25 countries in the past 30 years, including trips to the top of Mount Everest and Denali. As he says, if I do not walk, I cannot make a work of art. The physical involvement of walking creates a receptiveness to the landscape. I walk on the land to be woven into nature. A road walk can transform the everyday world and give a heightened sense of human history. So Filton argues that walking is an art form in its own right and argues for a wider acknowledgement of walking art. So Hamish, I think you need to get a bit better at explaining it, but it's kind of, again, this idea of kind of creating a relationship with the landscape and really kind of noticing where you are and noticing the beauty of it and really appreciating the natural environment. So here's one of his postcards. Unlike a drawn line, a walked line can never be erased. Walking is the constant, the art medium is the variable. The walk is the art. Walks are facts for the walker and fiction for everyone else. A walk has a life of its own, a beginning and an end. An artwork may be purchased, but a work cannot be sold. All my walks are related to the first, from the first to the last. Walks are like clouds, they come and go. So I think it's quite beautiful, quite a nice piece of poetry. You can imagine you wouldn't want to get stuck in the corner with them at a party because you'd be like, mate, what are you saying? But I think it's quite an interesting concept, and I'm going to look more into it, I think, for myself. And then here's another one of his pieces. This is an example of a piece he would make from a walk. So he's taken a lovely picture. He's kind of put in almost like some kind of like haiku-like phrases over the top. So we've got wind through the pines, clouds of breath and steam in the cold candlelit air. 7 days walking and 7 nights camping in a wood, Cairngorm, Scotland, March 1985. Song of the chaffinch, changing tune of the stream, walking for 7 days in a wood, Cairngorm, Scotland, 1991. So I think as kind of poems, they're really quite nice, and I really like the kind of the text over the image, and that's kind of as far as my appreciation goes currently. I also like walking, so I can kind of get that. But yeah, I just think these pieces they've got kind of a serenity to them that I really like. But again, I think once you get a bit deep into it, I'm a bit like, mate, what are you talking about? Oh, so this is I think my favourite land artist. So here we go. Let's have a look at what we're looking at. So one, we've got a lady who's kind of buried herself in flowers, looking good. And then we've also got this outline of a woman that's been kind of made in the sand. And then you can see kind of these images are of the tide coming in, filling the space, and then washing out again. I'm going to sneeze. So this is work by Ana Mendida, who's a Cuban-American performance artist, sculptor and painter. And the pieces we're looking at are from her Silhouetta series, which she made from 1973 to 1980. So those previous pieces were part of the Silhouetta series, and so are these. Here's a kind of a compilation. So she kind of creates these kind of outlines of bodies, specifically look quite female bodies in the landscape. And there's quite a kind of a ritualistic pagan element to them. I think they definitely look like, you know, you're up to something, you're casting a spell, which I really like. So what she says about these pieces is, I've been carrying out a dialogue between the landscape and the female body based on my own silhouettes. I believe this has been a direct result of my having been torn from my homeland, Cuba, during my adolescence. And she had to leave Cuba when she was very young because her dad had been quite high up in the Communist Party, but was part of the kind of a coup. Is it a coup against Castro? And they had to flee Cuba because Castro was like, betrayal. So they had to leave, and she didn't like that. She felt very torn from the place where she was and taken to the States, where she didn't feel like she 100% fitted in. So a lot of her experience comes from kind of being taken from her kind of homeland. So she says, I am overwhelmed by the feeling of being cast from the womb, nature. My art is the way that I re-establish the bonds that unite me to the universe. It is a return to the maternal source. So there's kind of an exploration of identity there. There's kind of a disenfranchisement, a kind of feeling alienated from her homeland and from nature. And there's also kind of this very kind of like pagan idea of like Mother Earth, Mother Nature, we want to reconnect with it. And over her lifetime as well, she's very interested in kind of the traditional religions of Cuba and of kind of America before it was westernized. So she was very interested in particularly Santeria, which is one of the big religions in Cuba. Yeah, which is really interesting as well, if you want to look into that. And I think these photographs are really powerful. And unfortunately, she died quite young. I think it's a shame we didn't get to see more of her work. And then finally, we're on to Andy Goldsworthy, who lives and works in Scotland. He was born in 1956, and he makes site-specific installations involving natural materials and the passage of time. So basically, he gets natural materials, makes cool sculptures, takes a picture of them, and then lets them kind of disintegrate. And if they disintegrate in a cool way, he'll keep taking pictures. He's also done some kind of work in the gallery and some more permanent installations. I think they're not as fun, so we're not going to look at those. We're going to look at these cool ones. So he says, my remit is to work with nature as a whole. It's pretty cool. Each work grows, stays, decays, integral parts of a cycle which the photograph shows at its heights, marking the moment when the work is most alive. There is an intensity about a work at its peak that I hope is expressed in this image. In the image, process and decay are implicit. So if we look at this piece here, he's created a kind of a sculpture out of sticks, which is a semicircle, and then the other half of it is reflected in the water to create this full circle illusion. I really like it. I think it looks quite witchy. And to continue with this kind of series of circles, here are some other works. So he's got one where he's created them using twigs, one with leaves and an icy puddle, dandelions, kind of brushes, and one where he's created the whole in leaves. So it's kind of this manipulation of nature that kind of draws your attention to how beautiful it is through a kind of a man-made intervention. And I actually really recommend, I've included a video in the links, which is kind of a video following him around for a day. The one I was looking for is What Do Artists Do All Day with Andy Goldsworthy. And if you can find that, it's really worth a watch. But this one is also good. And it just kind of shows how many attempts he's got to go through to make a lot of his work, and kind of the days he spends balancing stones and then they fall down. Because a lot of these you're a bit like, oh, how did he do that? And the answer is with lots and lots and lots of tries. So I kind of recommend watching them. I think they're quite funny. But I also think these images are very lovely. And then here's another two. So here's one he's made where he's cut stones in halves and coloured them and kind of arranged them in this spiral. That's very nice. And then here we've got one here where he's arranged yellow flowers in contrast with the purple flowers. And again, I think that's very nice. So it's just simple interventions captured beautifully, I think. And it just draws attention to a bit of natural beauty. Here's another one where he's kind of taken leaves and he's taken out the stem and then rearranged them and put different bits of leaves around it. I think that's a really, really nice, simple one. So you can imagine just taking bits of dandelion, rearranging the stems and ripping up leaves to create something that's very different. And then here's two final ones. This is ones he's made moulding ice. So as you can imagine, these took a long, long time with many, many breakages. And I think this one in particular, where he's got it curved round the tree, is absolutely fabulous. So it's kind of getting sections of icicle and joining them together to create these different patterns and then recording them. I just think they're really beautiful sculptures. You know, they won't have lasted for more than a day or two. And a bit like kind of all the work you put into a snowman, it's gonna eventually disappear. Yeah, so that's the end of this talk. That was land art. I know it's quite a lot to take in. A lot of different things are very kind of on the edges of what we think of as art, but I think they're quite thought-provoking. Yeah, so maybe have a wee think about next time you're maybe out in nature, what sort of little interventions you could do, and could you maybe make some little pieces a bit like Andy Goldsworthy by arranging different leaves, or maybe you're going to treat your next walk as an artwork. And we're going to finish up. This is an image of Callanish at sunset, and so this is a standing circle on the Isle of Harris, and it's really lovely, and it's a lovely, beautiful piece of early land art. There we go. So thanks everyone for watching. Hi everyone, thanks for watching. I hope that was a little bit interesting. Land art is such a broad topic and so often contradicts itself, I think. And as I'm sure you noticed, I have lots of opinions on it. Alright, I'll see you all next week. I hope you're well. Take care and stay safe. Bye!